I welcome everyone to this special Beta Break edition in collaboration with Spuit 25. Today our guest is Frans de Waal. We will talk about the beauty of the science of beauty and also beauty and behavior, how it is related and how it is connected. My name is Robert. I'm a biology student at the UVA. I'm very interested in behavioral biology, and that's part of why we wanted to invite Frans de Waal for a Beta Break edition. Together with Serene, I will moderate this program tonight.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining, and we're happy to organize this edition about the science of beauty with Frans de Waal. So I'm Serene. I'm a communication science student at the UvA, and I joined the Beta Break recently. So to explain a bit what the Beta Break is about, it's a discussion platform of the University of Amsterdam, organized by students. And every month we discuss a variety of topical subjects within the sciences.
If you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A, and we have some time in the end to answer some of them. So our guest for tonight is Frans de Waal. Welcome, Frans, all the way from the US. Thank you for being here. Can you give a short introduction?
Introduction? You give an introduction, I give an introduction.
Yeah. Can you give a short introduction?
Well, my field is animals. Animal behavior, so it's a bit of the beauty and the beast is sort of like the theme that we have here. I'm a primatologist, but I also work with a few other species than primates. I don't work with human primates very much, and so what I say about humans has to be taken as speculative, I suppose. For me, the topic of beauty is an interesting one because of the evolutionary connotations. But I think there's also some practical issues that are interesting to discuss. I think about how much animals care about beauty and how they respond to it and so on. And so I'll be happy to do this session with you. I'm a retired professor here at Emory University. Emory is in Atlanta, Georgia, the city where the elections were decided, so to speak. That's what we like to think here. Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where I am now, and it is here in the middle of the day. It's a very sunny day, and it's beautiful outside, and so I'm sort of locked up now indoors, but normally I would be sitting outside, I think, because the weather is really beautiful.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. So let's dive into it. We're going to start with the first part of this talk. That's mainly going to focus on beauty and evolution. So our first question is, how is the concept of beauty used in evolution?
Yeah, we usually don't use the term beauty, even though I think everything that is beautiful in nature, the colors of birds, or the song of birds, and all these secondary sexual characteristics that we see, the peacock tail, that's one of the traditional examples. What we see in terms of beauty, what we humans perceive as beauty, is very much tied to sexual selection. And Darwin, of course, was the first one to propose sexual selection, which was his most original idea, because evolution by natural selection was something that he shared with a few other people who had also thought about that issue, such as Alfred Wallace and so on. But sexual selection is an issue that Darwin came up with, saying that there are traits in animals that are inexplicable from a natural selection perspective. So if you, and the peacock tail was the example that he used. He said the peacock tail makes him sick That's what he literally said, because it doesn't make any sense. From a natural selection perspective, a peacock should not have a tail like that. It's a ridiculous thing that he has, and he has to fly around with it and feed with it, and he's only more conspicuous for predators that way, and so it's just a bad decision to have a tail like that. And so he came up with sexual selection and said, the only way to explain this is if maybe the females like a tail like this. And we now know from research that actually if you cut certain feathers out of their tail, if you damage the tail, or if you add feathers to the tail, that makes a difference for the females. So the females are really attracted to these huge ornamental structures. And we perceive them as beauty, and so that's the beauty of the peacock. I don't know if the female peacock that perceives that
they see it as beauty.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's actually there are books on sexual selection that claim that female taste in beauty is what underlies these decisions, and so there's certainly an attraction. But so what is the difference between being attracted to a certain feature and thinking it's beautiful? That's hard to say. And so sexual selection is the thing that Darwin came up with to explain certain things that animals do or have that from a natural selection perspective are stupid decisions. And so in the literature on sexual selection, there's some interesting claims. So for example, Zahavi, an Israeli biologist, he proposed what he calls the handicap principle. So the peacock is actually handicapped by a tail like this. And so his idea was that animals handicap themselves, and the other sex, it's usually the female, but it could also be the other way around. The other sex is then interested in seeing that he is still surviving despite his handicap. And that means he must be extremely healthy and well fed and so on. And so that's an interesting principle, the handicap principle. It was very controversial for a long time. It's now more or less accepted.
Well, if we look at birds, for example, for birds, mostly males are the ones that are, more beautiful, more colorful, and more, sometimes they're bigger, more color, and the females are more camouflaged. I was wondering if you compare that to humans. For humans, I think it's mostly women who are appeal to, for example, makeup or fashion, and males are, I think, less focused on beauty things. Well, you also studied primates, and how do primates handle such things as beauty? Are the males more focused on these things, or are the females, like humans, more focused?
Yeah. So in the primates, we have a lot of these features, colorful features, like the mandrill is very colorful. We have also features that we don't consider particularly beautiful, but are still sexually selected. So for example, the proboscis monkey, in Dutch, you call him the neusaap. The proboscis monkey has a big, heavy nose that I don't think is particularly beautiful, but I think the females must be thinking it is, because it's a sexually selected characteristic. You have in the orangutan, you have the phalanges. In Nederlands noem je dat wangplaten, big structures around the face in the male, which are also sexually selected, I'm pretty sure. And so the females must think they are beautiful. Now, in our closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, which are really the ones that you should be looking at if you want to understand humans, because they are in our little subfamily. Bonobos and chimpanzees, the females have a structure which is called a genital, in Dutch, genitale zwelling, a genital swelling, which is basically a big balloon pink structure on their behind, which is ornamental and which attracts males. The males are totally obsessed by it. And they follow a female around who has that structure, because it corresponds with fertility in the female. And so in our immediate family, there's actually a tendency for the females to be ornamented more than the males. And so I don't think humans are, in that sense, so exceptional. Of course, when people compare humans with the peacock and with all sorts of other animals, they say, well, it's so strange in these animals, the males are beautiful and the females are drab. And in our species, it's the other way around. I think our species corresponds perfectly fine with chimps and bonobos, where the female is ornamented. And there's an interesting side issue here, which is, because you mentioned makeup, application of makeup and that kind of issues, which is cultural partly. I don't think in all human cultures women do that necessarily, and there are some human cultures in which men do these things. So it's a bit of a Western perspective, but ornamentation by artificial means, which is what makeup is something we can see in the apes. And so I've often seen female chimpanzees pick up objects that we don't think are particularly beautiful, but they put them on their head or on their, maybe a dead mouse, or maybe a butterfly, or maybe a bunch of leaves that they drape around themselves, and they walk around with these things. And it's much more females who do that than the males.
But can we assume that that they would see it as, that they would do it because it would look like more attractive, or is it also just for fun? Or
well, we do know.
It's hard to say.
Yeah, we do know that they are aware of their appearance. We have tests of that, of self-awareness, which we do with mirrors and so on. And there's actually a nice observation of that, is an orangutan female in a zoo who would ornament herself in front of the mirror. And there's also stories of that about chimpanzees in language programs who are surrounded by people. And so they may have been influenced by people, but it's females who will put up lipstick or sunglasses or things like that in front of the mirror. So which suggests that it's not just that they ornament themselves, but they also want to see the results of it and are aware how that comes across. And there was recently an interesting paper on these genital swellings, a study done by Italian scientists in captivity in a big zoo group of bonobos. And they found that these female bonobos, when they have a genital swelling like this, they bend over more often, they pointed more at males in their direction, and they seem to be aware that they are signaling something with it, and that the males are attracted to it, or interested at least in it. So I think the tendency of the human female to ornament herself is not entirely unique in our little clade of primates. Because the kind of enhancement by artificial means it's much more a female thing, I think, than a male thing. Male chimpanzees, for example, they may use artificial things to enhance themselves, but it's not for beauty, it's for intimidation. So they will take, for example, they will take a drum, or they will take, in the wild has even been observed that they steal drums, kerosene cans from the camps of humans, like in Jane Goodall's case. The chimpanzee males will steal these objects to make a lot of noise with them. And it's not to look more beautiful, it's really to intimidate others. And so the males do use artificial means to enhance themselves, but it's, I think, for a different purpose than what the females do.
So would you say that beauty is, well, linked to gender, or or does it depend? To for example, for humans, it's different than for primates and for birds.
In nature at large, if you include all species and everything, I think the most typical pattern is that, yes, it is related to gender. It's that females have the taste for certain features and males produce them because they get matings out of it. And that means that they reproduce more, males who have these features. And so that is how evolution creates this whole tendency of males being more ornamented than females. So in nature at large, I would say, yes, that's the case. If you go into specific groups, there are, after all, birds where the females also sing, or the females sing even sometimes more than the males. And so if you go deeper into it, there are situations where it's the other way around, where the male is interested in these things, and the female provides the beauty, so to speak. There was an interesting study that was done in the Netherlands by Mariska Kret on how, in Leiden, how bonobos perceive, and chimpanzees perceive, the behinds of others. And we have done studies also, we've also done studies on how the primate males recognize the behinds of females. But Mariska Kret, she added humans to it also. And she found that I think the apes were much better at this task than the humans were. It was sort of interesting, I think.
I have a question. If we look at our senses, we tend to think that humans are mainly visually and auditively stimulated by beauty. To what extent is this also present in primates? And also, like, is the sense like of smelling play a greater role in this as well?
Yeah, so first of all, we humans underestimate our sense of smell systematically. And I would say that the senses of the primates are very similar to ours. Not maybe of all primates, but certainly the apes who are close to us, they are very visual creatures. And so smell is as important or unimportant, whatever your opinion is about human smell, olfaction. Humans are very sensitive to smell, and we underestimate that. And actually, it's very interesting in this time of COVID. We are having this virtual contact here over the internet. We're not smelling each other, which is sort of interesting, is that we have all these social contacts without touching and smelling. And I think we have noticed during the COVID crisis that that's actually not very satisfactory. I remember once sitting next to a businessman on a flight to Tokyo, and I asked him why he was flying all the way for one meeting to Tokyo, and he said he cannot do these things virtually because he wants to smell the people, he wants to see the people, he wants to see if they sweat, if they make a proposal, he wants to see all the body language, and he wants to smell them. And I think we humans, we smell a lot more things than we think. It's not just related to, let's say, the fertility of women, which is certainly something man can pick up from smell, but there's all sorts of other features. For example, rivalry. There's a study that was recently published from Israel that shows that they had filmed people when they greet each other, and they found that when people have shaken hands, they bring their hand in a few seconds later to their nose, sort of to scratch themselves or something, to do their hair, but the hand always finds the way to their nose. And it's especially when men have shaken hands with men or women have shaken hands with women. And so they think it has to do with intrasexual rivalry, and that you want to smell your potential rival. So anyway, smell is much more important than we think, we humans. So we underestimate it. And in other primates, I think the senses, that is very similarly distributed. Hearing and sight are the more important ones, and then smell is added to that, yeah.
So in your latest book, Mama's Last Hug, it's about emotions. Can you quickly explain what an emotion exactly is?
Well, an emotion is a state, a physical state. It is connected to the body. You cannot be emotional without the body being involved. If you meet someone who says, I was very emotional at this moment, and nothing happened to his heart rate or his voice or his color or his temperature, and his body was passive, that is not a very emotional moment, I can tell you. Your body is always involved in emotions. And so what the emotions do is prepare your body for a certain line of action. If it is fear, it prepares your body to either fight or flight. But there's all these other emotions that prepare the body for a certain course of action. And it is up to you what the action is. That's the interesting part. That's why it's so much more interesting as a concept than instinct. We used to talk in ethology always about instincts of animals and of humans. And instincts is a term that we use for under a particular situation, you're going to do a particular thing. So it's a one-on-one relationship between the stimulus, so to speak, and the action. Whereas emotion prepares your body for action, but it's still up to you. That's called the appraisal phase. It's up to you to decide what the action is going to be. So you may see a danger outside, a snake or whatever it is, and it creates fear in you, and you then need to decide, am I going to run away? Am I going to fight with it? Am I going to climb a tree? Do I give an alarm call? So it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with that danger. And so the emotions prepare your body for action and fear, for example. In Dutch, I'm not sure we have that expression, but in English we say, he's getting cold feet. It means that's a fearful reaction. And people have actually measured that. There's a program called Ghostbusters, who has measured, is it called Ghostbusters or what is it? What is that program? That it's a science program. Yeah, well, anyway, they have tested that.
Mythbusters.
Huh?
Mythbusters, I think.
Mythbusters. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That sounds better than Ghostbusters, because that's a movie. So they actually put people in fearful situations, like they put them in an airplane and they were spinning around, or they had awful animals crawl over them. So they put them in fearful situations, and they measured the temperature of their feet. And actually, you do get cold feet if you're afraid of something. And in rats also get cold feet. They have, of course, 4 feet, and the tail also gets cold. And so what happens in fear is that the body withdraws blood from the extremities, from the extreme parts of the body, to prepare your body for action, because you probably need to either flee or fight. And so getting cold feet is one of these typical reactions that, and typical body reactions that we share with a lot of other animals. And so the body prepares for a certain course of action. And so emotions, we usually now look at emotions, and this has been going on for a long time, as an adaptive state. Emotions are adaptive. You need to have emotions in order to arrive at these actions. And so even if there are emotions where maybe, let's say, religious emotions or something, where it's not so clear what the adaptive value is, for most of them, I think they have an adaptive function.
If we look at animals, how, because again, we're like about emotions, and especially like the measurement of emotions. You just mentioned that apparently we can measure, the expression cold feet. Would you say that, well, first, how can we know if an animal is happy or angry or sad? And would you say that all these emotions are measurable? And if yes, how can we measure them in general?
Yeah, that is a tough question, because I make a distinction between feelings and emotions. And I think increasingly neuroscientists are doing the same thing, is that we cannot know the feelings of animals. Feelings are private states that you experience. And I cannot know what a dog feels. I can guess what a dog feels, and I can guess what a chimpanzee feels, but not for sure. And I would say the same problem exists with humans. Human researchers very often conflate emotions and feelings, and so they ask people about their feelings. I don't actually trust self-report. I know that the social sciences are very heavy on that, on self-report data. I don't think people even know their own feelings very well, and who knows what they tell you. They may certainly try to present themselves as nicer than they usually are, or something like that, when they describe their feelings. And so many psychologists, they conflate emotions and feelings, and in the field of animal behavior, but also in neuroscience, increasingly, we make a distinction. We say the feelings are hard to know. And even if I talk with a human who describes feelings, there's still a filter there that I'm not sure is completely reliable. But emotions are expressed in the body and are expressed in the brain also. And so emotions we can measure. So if we say, for example, that a chimpanzee is jealous, let's say, or a dog is jealous for that matter, we're not necessarily saying that we know exactly what the chimpanzee is feeling in terms of feeling jealous. We're just saying that the chimpanzee is showing behavior that is consistent with being jealous. The chimpanzee, for example, reacts to his mom being approached by another male, and he's gonna
So
attack
it's still an assumption to yeah, it's an assumption to say to say how he's feeling or how it is feeling. So when I ask, are these feelings and emotions for humans and animals, are they the same?
Then I can say emotions are probably very similar because we can measure them, expressed under similar circumstances with similar consequences. In the primates with similar facial expressions, which the face of a chimpanzee has exactly the same muscles that we have, so the facial expressions are very similar. Yeah. So the emotions, yes, we can map them onto each other, and they are in many cases almost identical. The feeling part, I assume that the chimpanzee has very similar feelings to what we have, but I cannot ask them that. And in addition, there are emotions who probably don't reach the level of feeling. You may have noticed in yourself sometimes that you have emotions that you discover gradually. That I've always hated that guy, and you never realize that you hated the guy, but you sort of become aware of your feelings gradually sometimes, or not at all. And so emotions don't need to reach the feeling level necessarily. There are probably also emotions that stay under the radar and do their work, so to speak, in preparing you for certain behavior without you being much aware of it.
Sorry.
Go right.
I see a very interesting question in the Q&A. You mentioned cold feet. Cold feet. Is it the same for invertebrates? And can we see such similar physiological changes in these two, or in flies, for instance, insects?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the cold feet example is going to extend to the fly. That I don't know. And the physiology of the fly is so different from a mammal. And of course, you probably need to be warm-blooded to get cold feet. Or so. I mean, this is all. But yes, emotional states in invertebrates. I'm completely on board that probably exists. You can see them getting agitated or getting active under certain circumstances and reacting to certain dangers and so on. It would be a bit surprising if they had no emotional states to me. And so I think the concept of emotions is not limited to the vertebrates.
If we go back to beauty, what can you say about the relation between beauty and emotion? Would you, for instance, say that it's maybe a cause and effect kind of relation, or?
Yeah, I think beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, as we say in English. And so beauty usually means attracted, you're attracted. And there are, for example, baboons have babies, which I think are incredibly ugly. But I'm sure the mother baboon thinks this baby is absolutely beautiful. So, because he's very attracted to it, and baboons are very fond of babies, and as soon as a female comes with a new baby, she is surrounded by other females who all want to touch and hold and look at it and so on. And so they're clearly very attracted. So for them, a baby baboon is absolutely beautiful. For me, not so much. So yeah, I think the emotions involved in perception of beauty are always attraction. That's why we call it beauty, and ugly is probably repulsion or disgust. And so when we say something is ugly, we are maybe disgusted by it. So I'm not sure that you can map them one on the other directly and say beauty always means attraction, but I think that's how we define it almost, no?
Is that the same for animals? Can animals be delighted by something beautiful, or can they be disgusted?
Well, disgust is an interesting idea, but attracted by certain things. I'm sure, for example, male chimpanzees who are very attracted to these behinds of the females when they're swollen, which is only a couple of times because their fertility is only like every 6 years or so. I mean, they have a very long interbirth interval because they nurse such a long time. And so when a male sees a female in that state, he's absolutely attracted to it. And so he must consider that beautiful. That's what I assume. Disgust is a very interesting concept. Disgust in the human literature, if you look now at the psychology textbooks, they present disgust almost like a uniquely human emotion. They say only humans have disgust because, and they give us an example, because the dog licks his testicles and eats his own feces. And so the dog clearly has no disgust. There's no way that the dog can have the disgust emotion. Even though we know that dogs are disgusted by citrus fruits, for example. If you and you should not try this at home if you have a dog. If you give a dog a lemon, that's not good for the dog, and it's actually poisonous. And the dog has a very strong negative reaction if you bring a citrus close to their nose. And so the dog is disgusted by something totally different. We think citrus fruits are nice, but the dog doesn't think they're particularly nice. And so disgust, I think, is not limited to humans. I don't know why psychologists have picked up on that, because we have a very clear disgust facial expression, which we share with the chimpanzee, who also has that same facial expression when he's disgusted. There's an interesting experiment that was done by a French primatologist. I'm forgetting now her name. She would give bonobos at a sanctuary who lived in the sanctuary, but they could reach through the bars at food. She would give the bonobos the choice between 6 pieces of banana in a row. And so the bonobo could pick up these pieces and eat them. But one piece of the 6 was placed on a piece of feces. And so what the bonobos did in this test is they picked up 5 pieces of banana and ate them, and they left alone that particular piece that was left on a piece of feces. And so that's a disgust response. And so that's how she's testing the disgust emotion, so to speak, in the primates. It's highly developed and it's highly adaptive. It's an emotion, but it's highly adaptive in the sense that you need to stay away from anything that could contaminate you. We are learning this. This is another lesson from the COVID crisis, that you have to be careful with viruses and with bacteria and so on. And so the primates, they stay away from things that contaminate them and can make them sick, and touching the feces of somebody else is not necessarily the healthiest thing to do. And so all of these emotions have their adaptive value.
Well, that takes us to the next part about beauty and perception. Is there research on the aesthetic sense of animals, their musical abilities, or their perception?
Yeah, that's a very rich field, actually, the musical perception. There's a lot of studies now on their sense of rhythm. Can they make rhythm? Can they understand rhythm? Do they follow rhythm? The best examples, if there's a cockatoo snowflake who dances on music. I think the Beastie Boys, he dances on the Beastie Boys and follows rhythm, so follows the rhythm of the music. And so people do experiments on the sense of rhythm. the perception of human music. We've actually done studies on how the chimpanzees perceive human music. There's an interesting classical experiment that was done long ago by a scientist in Japan who would put a starling, I believe, in a cage, who could sit on this perch or on that perch. If you would sit on this perch, Mozart would play. If you would land on this perch, then Schoenberg would play. And he found that the starlings prefer Mozart by far over Schoenberg. And so they have a taste in music, so to speak.
Did they all do, or was it just maybe one or just a few? Because
no, this was, I think this was very general. And the same scientist, actually, his name is Watanabe. He did studies on the perception of pigeons of masters, of painting masters. And so he would show them cubists or impressionists. So let's say you show them a lot of Cézanne or a lot of Picasso, and then you show them Monet and something. And he found that they could make a distinction between cubists and impressionists, even if you had trained them on, let's say, 2 of these painters, then they could generalize to the style. And they could even do it when the pictures were not in color, and they were very good connoisseurs of human art at some point. This became a very famous study. That doesn't mean that these pigeons necessarily had a preference, I believe, for the one or the other, but they had just learned the configuration of this is how this kind of art looks, and this is how that kind of art looks. And so, yeah, that kind of studies are done. If you ask the production of art, there are, of course, the painting chimpanzees, so to speak. This became an issue when Desmond Morris is a very famous biologist who wrote The Naked Ape, which is still the best-selling popular book in biology. And Desmond Morris himself is a bit of a painter, beautiful paintings actually. And he had a chimpanzee named Congo at the London Zoo, who was very fond of painting. For most of these chimps who are painters, it is just an activity. They don't care about the end product very much. They may eat the end product or they may destroy it once they're done with it. But Congo was very fond of painting and was very good at it. And at some point, Desmond Morris, this is like a funny story. He sent paintings made by Congo to a Parisian gallery under a different name, under a French name, Pierre Brassou. He sent them to this gallery in Paris, and they displayed them, and many people came, and many people loved the paintings because actually Congo had a very good taste for color, in my opinion. And so many people loved the paintings until, of course, Desmond Morris called the gallery and said it's actually made by a chimpanzee. Then all of a sudden, the French were extremely offended by the whole thing. And they tried to make fun of it and try to denigrate the paintings. But it's interesting that people in the beginning were very interested in these paintings, and they sold for large amounts of money. So yeah, so the apes have, it's not figurative painting. It's never figurative painting. No. It is always sort of abstract. It's what in humans you would call at the level of a 3 or 4 year old child. That's It's never figurative. Yeah.
So when an animal is painting, would you say that it's more kind of a trick that they've learned to pick a color and just put it on a paper and
no, it's not a trick, because Congo, for example, had preferences.
Okay.
Morris describes that if he would remove the painting before Congo was done, he would get mad at Morris. If if he added colors, then Congo would add colors at a different place. There are studies on this, and there are certain preferences that these animals have, and so it is not just for, and it's also not done for food. They don't make these paintings to get rewards or something. They make it as sort of activity that they like to perform. You don't need to feed them or reward them for the activity.
Thank you. To what extent does a pleasant stimuli, auditively or visually, so again, going back to the senses, influence the behavior of animals, primates, humans?
To what extent are they influenced by stimulation?
To what extent does a pleasant stimuli, like a stimulus that is like pleasant, beautiful, attractive, influence the behavior of animals, primates, humans, auditively and or visually, like the stimuli?
Yes, I don't think we know that. You mean if they have certain preferences for certain stimuli that they are?
More if like pleasant. I mean, if they perceive it as pleasant, influence their behavior.
Yeah, if you mean by pleasant like food, of course there are certain food preferences that they have, or pleasant by in terms of temperature or weather. But what are you thinking of in humans? What would be a good example in humans?
Can be all sorts of things, right? Maybe, for example, music.
Yeah,
is
music, yes. Visually, again, a
Yeah,
painting.
those things have been done. There was once a study long ago that claimed that humans are the only ones who care about music. And so they had played music to I think chimpanzees, and they had not responded one way or the other, being attracted or being repulsed. But we did a study a couple of years ago where I think we had Indian music and African music and Western music that we played to the chimpanzees, and we measured how close to the speakers they would sit. They were in an outdoor enclosure, so they could sit far away or they could sit near the speakers. And they preferred, I believe it was Indian music, they preferred that. So they do have certain preferences, as you would expect. I think everything is regulated by preferences. And so you would expect that certain things attract them and other things repulse them. That doesn't mean that you understand what it is, or that they dream away with music as we sometimes do. I'm not sure that they were doing that, but you hear the same thing about pets, of course. You hear that certain pets prefer certain sounds over others, or certain kinds of music over others. Yeah.
Okay, and if we see it the other way around, because we just discussed how, a pleasing stimulus like beauty has an influence on behavior, but if we see it the other way around, can we say that behavior influence beauty?
What would be a human example again of that?
Maybe, I don't know, if I take the example of like human attraction, maybe someone is not attracted to the physical beauty of appearance of a person, and then due to the type of behavior that this person has, it changes the whole perception, and the first person starts to see the second person as like beautiful. I don't know if that makes sense.
I see. Yeah, I'm not sure actually that the primates are as sensitive to physical beauty. Apart from, let's say, these features that I mentioned, like the genital swelling of a female and so on. I think they're actually more interested in the character and the behavior of other individuals than their physical appearance. And so if you have an individual in the group who's overly aggressive, I don't think others are very attracted to that. And you have individuals who are very, very kind and gentle and generous. And I think that attracts them to that. Chimpanzees have a very strong tendency for reciprocity. If I'm kind to you, you're going to be kind to me. And if I'm not kind to you, you're going to be unkind to me. So they very much mirror these tendencies between each other. And we can test that out. We can test it out, for example, with food sharing. You find that individuals who share food, they do that usually mutually. I share food with you, you share food with me. So it's a very reciprocal kind of arrangement. which means that individuals who are nice and kind, they also get a lot of niceness and kindness back. And sometimes that works over their lifetime. We had an old female who was always the kindest female, and she was an alpha female. She was a high-ranking female, but very, very kind and generous. And when she was old and could barely walk anymore, everyone was awfully kind with her. And so I thought she's sort of being repaid at the end of her life for all the nice things that she has done for others. So I think that's how things work in the primates. And the physical beauty, I think, is less important than the behavioral tendencies that they have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now yeah, I move to other topic. You also wrote a book about good and evil in humans and other animals. Would you say that goodness in primates is linked to beauty, and to what extent is evil behavior linked to ugliness? Well, if you see, for example, a cartoon, most of the time the superheroes are the more shiny and the beautiful persons, and the bad guys are more the dark and the ugly persons. Or
Yeah. I can see that. I've never tried to make that connection between goodness, so to speak, and beauty. But since we use beauty basically for everything we are attracted to, everything we like to experience or are attracted to, I think that's a logical connection to make. But I'm not sure that the primates perceive it in that way, that they say, he's always nice to me, he's a wonderful colleague, so to speak, and that makes him beautiful. I'm not sure that they think that way, but I think it's a logical connection to make. Yeah, and we use of course disgust for bad behavior, and that's one of the reasons, because I mentioned before that psychologists have declared now recently that disgust is a uniquely human emotion, and that is because they confuse moral disgust with disgust in general. So we have moral disgust. For example, someone takes my parking spot, and it is my spot, and I'm disgusted by that kind of behavior. I'm disgusted by people who try to get money for a fake cancer that they have, for example, as people do on the internet sometimes. So we are disgusted by certain kinds of behavior, and that's called moral disgust. And I'm sure moral disgust is related to the other forms of disgust. We pull the same face with moral disgust as we do for food disgust, so to speak. So these emotions are all connected. But we certainly have a disgust for certain kinds of behavior. And I think chimpanzees have that same tendencies. And chimpanzees can get very upset if, for example, someone who always shares food with them normally, all of a sudden is not doing it today. They throw a tantrum, they get very angry at these situations because that's an unexpected turn of event. And so you could say they are disgusted by what happened to them. Yeah.
Okay. If we look at all the books that you wrote about behavior, for example, or good and evil, could it be that the concept of beauty is a key concept in those books? And would you maybe consider writing a book specifically about beauty in the future?
Yeah, a book about beauty. I think we would need to know a lot more. There are books about beauty, but they're all written from the perspective in nature. They're all written from the perspective of sexual selection. It's like, how does sexual selection bring about certain beautiful features like song and colors and so on? And so I'm certainly not going to add to that kind of literature, I think. It would be more interesting to know what animals perceive as beautiful or what they prefer. And you could, of course, do tests with primates on touch screens, giving them images, some of which they can prefer over others. But there's very little research on that. So there is a field coming up of music perception and music production in animals, and that's a very interesting field, I think. But there isn't much. It's a lot of what we know about this is speculative and anecdotal, and so there is not enough to put a whole book together, I think, on that.
I want to ask you another question about the connection or the relationship between beauty and, for example, partner choice. For birds, for example, they well, a lot of birds also select on the song. So the bird with the male bird with the most beautiful song is more chance to reproduce. But how is this song connected to maybe better genes? Is it that the more beautiful song, the male with the more beautiful song is also the one who has an offspring with also a more beautiful song, would you say? Or is it not maybe connected to better genes or better survival? Why do they choose to select on their on their song?
Yeah, there's even a cultural element to that, is that because birdsong varies from region to region, even in the same species, they may be singing differently in this part of the city than that part of the city. There's very interesting research on these, what they call vocal dialects in birds.
Yeah.
And the females are sensitive to that. If the male sings the wrong dialect, she may either be attracted or be repulsed by that. So they're sensitive to these dialects. And so there's a cultural element to the production of these features. The best known case is the bowerbird. The bowerbird is a bird in Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, which builds a very elaborate nest and the male brings many different colors to the nest. And these colors vary by region. And so you have a valley, let's say in New Guinea, you have a valley where all the bowerbirds have blue items in the nest. And then you go to the next valley and all the male bowerbirds of the same species have pink objects in their nest. And they arrange them, and like real artists, they fly up to a tree to look at their nest from a distance to see how it looks. Then they go back, rearrange all these things. And the females visit many, many different bowers before they settle on a male to mate with and to stay with and raise their young with. And so the females judge these bowerbird nests on their quality, so to speak, but there's a cultural element because the males imitate each other. The males of one valley go all one way, and so they have fashions, so to speak, which don't necessarily stay the same. So there's a lot of this, and there's beauty perception in a way, in the sense that the females have preferences, and so that means that they are attracted to certain kinds and not to other kinds.
Yeah, because there are also birds that I forgot the name of this bird, but there's a bird that is cleaning the place for where he's doing a dance for the female to attract the female, and before he starts his dance, he cleans the place. So I was thinking, well, maybe cleaning up the place would be also something that he can show that he's a great helper, or he's very good. Yeah.
Well, males may want to show that they're good helpers by, for example, feeding the female. And that's something you can observe all the time in birds. We have here in the yard, we have cardinals, which is the male is very red and the female is brownish red. The male, before they settle down and build a nest, he feeds the female constantly, even if at a moment that she's really not interested in food, he brings food to her. And I think many birds do this, and this is a way for females to say, oh, this is a good provider. This male is going to be able to feed my young because they help out at the nest. He's going to be able to feed the young because he's a good provider. So yeah, I think but that strays us a little bit from the beauty part, I think. But it's a very practical consideration. So can the male provide food?
I think that
There
goes.
are
Oh, sorry. No, it's just I just wanted to add. I think that goes with how, yeah, the fact that behavior like influence beauty, like because the male behaves in like this way, then the female like starts to, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Go for it, Robert.
there are some interesting Q&A questions, but before we dive into those, I want to ask you an final question. In your opinion, do you think that beauty is necessary to survive?
I don't think so. It may be necessary to reproduce if it's one of these sexually selected traits. So for you to attract a mate, you may need to have these traits, and that means that the mate finds them beautiful, so to speak. But I think there's lots of animals who survive and reproduce without these characteristics, and they're not necessarily particularly attractive. Like the slime.
In a broader perspective,
Mm-hmm.
for example, right now we are in a lockdown, in the pandemic, and museums are closed. Everyone is at home. We cannot enjoy the paintings, or we can listen to music. But what if we cannot go to any museum or cannot see any art anymore and cannot listen to any music anymore? If you say that art and music is part of beauty, maybe then your opinion would be different. But
yeah, I think we humans are very sensitive to art and music. We're more sensitive to music, I think, than most primates, and we produce art massively, which is part of our playfulness, so to speak. It has a certain playful element, the art production. And you know that there's a famous Dutch historian, Huizinga, who wrote a book called Homo Ludens. We are a playful species, a forever young species, because playfulness is also associated with young individuals, of course, in most animals. And so, yeah, we have such a strong dependency on that we feel our life is empty if there's no art at all in it. And I think that's a sort of universal human characteristic. Certainly music and dance is a universal human characteristic. And so we're very strong on that. That doesn't mean that it's completely absent, of course, in other primates, like chimpanzees drum on trees, on dead trees, and with a very resounding quality. And chimpanzees may move in a rhythmic fashion when it all of a sudden starts to rain. It's called the rain dance. So it's not that these things are completely absent, but we humans have really elevated that to such an important part of our life.
Okay, I think we can go to the questions from the audience. We did have a question at the beginning. I think it goes with the beauty and perception. Humans are influenced by each other and their perception of beauty changes. For example, fashion. Does this concept exist in nature as well?
Yeah, so I mentioned already the bowerbirds who may have a fashion of this year we do blue, and then the next year some of the males start with pink, and then all the others imitate them. And so fashion may exist. And there's studies on the primates also. There's a study that was done by a Dutch primatologist, Edwin van Leeuwen, who found a group of chimpanzees in a sanctuary where a female started putting grass in her ear. This is one of these self-ornamentation things. She started putting grass in her ear and walking around with it. And within a year, many females, more females than males, many females in this sanctuary started doing the same thing. And so they had created a fashion, in this case, of ornamentation, self-ornamentation. So I think being influenced by others, I think is very much a primate thing. We call it monkey see, monkey do. And I think the primates have this a very strong tendency to imitate and to be influenced by each other.
Okay. Next question. Would Professor Deval also regard beauty in terms of moral beauty, for example, classical music, and more natural beauty, one connected with sexual attraction? So the same distinction as with moral disgust and just disgust.
You mean like moral beauty and regular beauty or something? Or, well, moral beauty would be that you're attracted to certain kinds of behavior. Isn't that what it would mean? If moral disgust is that you mean you disapprove of certain behavior, or you think it's terrible behavior, and then moral beauty would be that you're attracted to certain behavior. And I think that's certainly something that's possible, is that there are certain behaviors like generosity and kindness and forgiveness that we think are, that we evaluate positively. And so we think they're beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, next question. There is a distinction between feelings and emotion. So we discussed that earlier. The function of emotion is clear, but what is the use of feelings?
Yeah, that's such an intriguing question. It's a very good question, because I've often puzzled about that, and many people puzzle about that, is that, do we actually need feelings? Could we not just have emotions without feelings? Now, if we need to regulate emotions, then feelings are useful, because the feelings is basically that you become aware of the emotion. And so if, let's say, we use our cognition to regulate emotions, to suppress some and enhance others, and then knowing your feelings is probably useful. And primates do regulate their emotions. You know probably the very famous marshmallow test that was done with kids, where you give a child a marshmallow and you leave the room and you say, if you don't eat the marshmallow, I'll bring you a second one. And then they film these kids, and these kids, they are very tempted, of course, to eat the marshmallow, but they are waiting and holding out, and they can do that for 15 minutes or so. They're holding out. And so they're suppressing the temptation. They're suppressing emotion. They're suppressing an emotion that would make them eat the marshmallow. And these experiments have been done also now with great apes, and great apes are just as good at regulating their emotion. And I think in order to regulate your emotion, to down-regulate the temptation to eat that food, you need to be aware of it. And there's actually indications in these experiments with the apes that they are aware, because they are playing more with toys that they are given. And so they seem to be aware of the temptation and trying to suppress it. So feelings may be helpful if in a cognitive fashion you want to regulate or down-regulate emotions. So they may have a function in that sense.
There was also a question that says, research on humans shows that beautiful people are considered as good as well. Does this also apply to primates?
Beautiful people are considered good?
Yeah.
Yeah. They earn more money, we know that. They people are attractive. They get more things done than people are unattractive. Even if they're not good, maybe. I'm not sure that correlation has been established. Is that
maybe it's not a beauty, but maybe another aspect. For example, an alpha male is maybe stronger than other males, so he can because he has more power, he can achieve more things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in that
direction.
Yeah,
the alpha male, but the alpha male doesn't need to be bigger than other males. The alpha male can be smaller than other males, and so it's not necessarily the strongest male who becomes the alpha male, because a lot of skills go into it. Yeah, I'm not sure that in humans even, I'm not even sure that if you would take 10 people and let's say 10 men, it doesn't matter, man or women, or you take 10 women and you rank them on beauty, whether that would also translate into good characteristics like personality and so on. I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced that there's much of a correlation between what we consider beautiful people and a beautiful character. I'm not convinced of that, and I don't know if there's research on that.
I think we're coming to the end of this edition. I'd like to thank our guests, everyone who joined this talk. I hope you found it interesting and you learned more, like us. And yeah, thank you for everyone who attended. Thank you, of course, to Frans de Waal for all these information and for sharing your knowledge. That was very, very, very interesting. I think we're going to introduce our next, just to introduce quickly our next edition, Robert.
Yeah, so the next Better Break edition will be about the science of cosmetics. It will be very interesting. We will dive into the chemistry behind it and all sorts of things about. It's related to this topic, to beauty, but yeah, it will focus on cosmetics next month. So yes, thank you very much, Frans de Waal, for joining our event. And it's super nice that you could join this event, because you're in the US with I think 6 hours time difference, and I think the opportunity of a Zoom meeting is, well, super cool to just call you and have an edition like this with you.
We also would like to. Sorry. We also would like to thank, of course, SPOW25 that allowed us to do this edition online on their platform. Yeah.
And well, yeah. Thank you, audience. Hope to see you next month. And
oh, and Frans, if you have maybe one last word to share to us.
Well, I was very glad to be part of this, even though I usually don't think in terms of beauty and ugliness. That's not necessarily the way I divide the world around me, but I think it's a very interesting topic to explore. And there's actually, as we noticed during the discussion, there's a lot of things that we don't know and should explore more.
Oh, we just had a very interesting question. When will Professor de Waal be back in the Netherlands?
Well, my goal is actually end of May to come back to the Netherlands. And I've just heard today that the EU is thinking about a vaccine passport, because I'm double vaccinated now. But the situation in Holland is not particularly good, I believe, is the virus yet. But there's still my hope by the end of May that I will be able to come. Yeah.
Yeah, we hope that by then maybe the situation will get a bit better. And things
maybe it evaporates, maybe it goes away. That's what people have been saying for 2 years now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.